Hello everyone, today we're going to have a quick video on naming primitives. In the previous video, we saw that we had this map of our primitives that then go into semantics, and we had a little bit of trouble understanding which number to use for each primitive. Today we're going to actually fix this. I'm going to add a number for each different variation of this color, going up from 100 in 100s for each different darker variation. So we start from 100 and we go up by 100 each time we have a darker variation of our primitive. This is where we can start to organize them a little bit better. So this green, for example, we know this is probably not a 100 because it's not as light as this white. I can start to move these around on the canvas. So I probably think this is more like a 200. And this darker one is probably more like a 500. I can add that number inside to move them around on the canvas. This makes it a lot easier to map them later on. These yellows, they feel like they're in the wrong place to me. This is probably a 200. And this again is probably more like a 400. So I'm going to go and make this the 400. I make this the 200. These blues, again, probably in the wrong place. I'm going to move this over to be something more like a 400. And again, this one is to be a lighter 200. So I can move this to be matching these ones. Purple, red, the same. Move that purple down. Move this purple. Now that's more like a 300 maybe because it's not as dark as these. And this is not scientific at the moment, but if you're doing this in a proper way, you'd be doing color contrast ratios and matching these in a much more sophisticated way. This red, definitely 200, and this one looks darker too. So let's make this the 400. And these pinks is where we start to have some trouble. Because these are so similar, I'm actually going to decide to consolidate them in my variables. I'll use the same value instead of these two very different, very similar ones. I'm just going to pull these two out for a second, and we can move them back in later. This pink here is actually more like a 200, but to be honest with you, it's a much lighter one, so it could be a 150. I'll keep it as 200 for now, and then this red is already kind of placed in the right position. Let's go for 500 and move this to match this green at the top. So now I need to insert one of these. So I'll insert this one to be alongside this 300 here. So if we compare this to what we had before, I'll just pull these side by side now. You can see it's much easier to see where they land on that color ramp chart. So now let's try and do that in our variables as well. Pull open the panel, head back to my primitive, and start to match these colors a bit more. I think the monos are already done because they were in an order already. But where we start to look at the different colors like green, yellow, blue, etc., they weren't right. So the green is actually a green. So this darker one is the 500 and this one is the 200. The yellow, this one is actually the 400 and this one is still 200. For the blue, the darker one is the 400 too. And the lighter one is the 200, so that was correct. The purple 100 is actually the 300, and the 200 is correct. So I'm just going to move these up to make them in the right order for their numbers here. For the red, that is actually a 400 for the darker one, and a 200 is correct, so move that above. And the pink, we have a 200 instead of a 100. Then we have the one ending 3B1, which is this, is our 300, and we're going to delete this one. And then we have a 500 lastly. So this now matches what we have on the canvas for our color ramp. What we then go and do is head back to our colors, and within here I've actually mapped all of them out to be the correct primitive alias. But you'll see we have an issue now with decorative pink day mode because the pink 300 disappeared. What that needs to be, I believe, is the background action color, which is the pink 200. We just double check on the canvas. Yeah, so that light is correct, but in dark mode, the action is actually a much darker variation. So background action is correct, decorative pink, I think we had a darker one too, which now matches what we have over here. That's how we would probably want to do this. We would want to, instead of having them all lined up like the left-hand side, we try to match up the primitives based on a number scale, which allows us to identify any gaps that we have in our structure and allow us to delete any variables that maybe we don't need from consolidation. We would then feed these primitive variables into our semantics using an alias system, and they would then cascade down to our components. See you next time.